Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Tranter model of 1879 self-extracting army revolver, an early and influential British top-break design, and yet not particularly well loved or remembered. I'll explain why after the light box. With an overall length of 11.5 inches, we are at the same general size as our previous model, and we're close to the same weight, although slightly lighter at 2.3 pounds. We again chamber the 450 Adams cartridge, 6 of them fitting into the cylinder thanks to a top break system and extracting all the same. There would also be a later option for another cartridge, the 455 Mark II. Part of the reason you're seeing so many in-depth episodes on revolvers lately is because we've been able to crack a long-neglected vein of research and really put together a proper evolutionary tale for these venerable sidearms. This was made possible, of course, thanks to our patrons. Because not everything is available online, we actually had to spend funds to get in fresh research, including making our poor friend Lars do some direct digging in Belgium and covering his expenses. Which is how I'm able to tell you all the most accurate histories possible. So, if you have some connection to an archive out there, please let us know. Or if not, please consider donating to our cause. Our episode today is again built on at least 2 others, the first being the Tranter model of 1868, which is when we introduced the once king of the Birmingham trade, now almost forgotten. In our last episode, we saw the Tranter 1878, an attempt at a mass-produced interchangeable parts Marshall handgun for broad military service in Britain. Sadly for the Tranter, it had failed. This wasn't ideal because William Tranter had just built a massive factory specifically intending to capitalize on government contracts for small arms. Mind you, this wouldn't just be for pistols, but also for rifles and other goods, but being the Birmingham revolver kingpin, he certainly expected a chance at the throne of the service standard sidearm. Ultimately, Tranter's 1878 solid frame gate loading 450 caliber revolver was exactly in line with standard service pistols of that time. Unfortunately for him, the British government was looking for the next generation in personal protection. You see, the army in particular had lingered on the single-shot percussion pistol for too long, and finally had to give in to adopting the then Navy standard Adams centerfire revolver in 1877. In 1878, emergency purchases of the Tranter were made in order to cover a shortage of Adams revolvers as demand exceeded any hope of supply. This was, of course, thanks to an escalation of international tensions following the Russian victory in the Russo-Turkish War. However, behind the scenes, the army didn't want to just catch up to everyone else. They wanted a truly modern revolver. Now, in the 1870s, that was something of a hot question. The decade would start with very simple arms that had been adapted from percussion muzzle loaders over to rimfire and even early centerfire cartridges, but most of the mechanisms were merely concerned with aligning various chambers with the bore and smacking the ignition system. Thanks to service experience, it was found that additional features could be rather nice to have. Some of the first extras had to do with loading. Thanks to our repercussion series, lots of you guys know how to use one of these now, this being a reproduction of the 1851 Colt that would have been available to the British at that time. And then, because I don't have the Adams with me just yet, we'll borrow our old 1878 Tranter from last episode. Now, what is the major difference between these two roll guns? Well, other than one being single action only and the other being double action, there were plenty of single and double action percussion pistols, so no worries there. The big difference is how freaking long it takes to load. So, in the case of our percussion pistol, you go from having to half cock and then index this guy around, filling each cylinder with, or each chamber with powder, and then putting in a ball that you then have to, compress correctly into place, return, next ball, compress correctly into place, or bullet if you're using a bullet. After all that's done, then you get to not shoot it yet either. You have to flip her over, keep your half cock, and you have to cap, and then roll and cap, and roll and cap, and roll and clap. And you have to make sure your caps are the correct size and fit, and that you've cut a ring of lead, and that you're not gonna have chain fires. Doing this right and quickly is very difficult, and quickly is not really the word, just faster than average, right? Whereas, if I want to load this particular revolver, I manually rebound the hammer, if it's the kind that does that, and I open the gate, and then I take 6 cartridges, and I just sort of load them in here. And then once I've loaded up 6 of them, I close her up and I'm ready to go. Yeah, that's several orders of magnitude faster just from being able to do that, which is why people were pretty excited about breech loading at all, whether or not there was any sort of mechanism to help you do it. Now, of course, going to breech loading from all this mess was a major change, but it was soon apparent that once you introduce this metallic cartridge thing, well, there's a lot of mechanical ways to get even faster at loading and unloading. So we start to see rapid, usually break-open loading options being patented, actually farther back than you might think. This example from Hubert Comblain is from 1849 and allows easier access to pinfire cartridges loaded in his revolver. If you look carefully though, you can only load a few at a time, and extraction is still singular. Tranter would try his hand at a break-open with his 1868 patent, which featured a tip-up design using a manual ejector. In 1869, he'd further simplify this, although still an awkward affair. I'm uncertain if either of these designs were really produced. A much better method can be found in Charles King's US 1869 patent for a rack and pinion extractor system, which automatically pulled spent cases from the cylinder when the pistol was broken open. This would famously be purchased by Smith & Wesson and used in their No. 3 series of top break revolvers. We've already explored this, at least as far as the Russians were concerned, although I'd like to revisit them again someday with fresh knowledge. The No. 3 Army-style revolvers would be well established in the market by 1874. Now I want to point out that today's episode is about, well, British revolvers, which means Tranter will only be constrained by British patents at that time. Smith & Wesson rarely filed outside the US, but they did do so in this case with an updated King's patent in British hands still in 1869. The Smith & Wesson action wasn't exactly a strong seller in the British or European market though. Many felt the top break was interesting, but the extraction mechanism was complicated and frankly somewhat weak. But it wouldn't be long before a simplified action would emerge. The earliest instance I can find of this is in the 1871 Belgian patent by Philippe Connet. Here, the complicated rack and pinion has been replaced with a simple finger. The top strap was latched with a crosspin, which proved to be a little weaker than desirable. Now, the Connet patent would actually become very popular in the British market, though it was marketed under the name Price at that time. I'm actually still researching the matter because, while there is a Price patent that shows the same top break mechanism, it is only meant to cover a specific cylinder stop. I've actually yet to turn up the Connet top break system in the British patent records as of this recording. Regardless of how it was protected, the Price system would actually be picked up by several Birmingham manufacturers, eventually including the then just expanding firm of P. Webley. It's hard to say when this pattern first emerged in the British commercial market, obviously sometime between 1871 and 1877, predating our Tranter today for sure. The rapid extraction and loading system was popular not only with the private buyers, but also when chambered for Army Standard 450 Adams cartridge, it saw brisk sales as an officer's private purchase. But Tranter felt there could be some obvious improvements. For starters, that crosspin was a fairly weak latch, and likely to stretch or fail if paired with more powerful cartridges or if fired a great many times. Interestingly, while not a claim of the earlier Smith & Wesson patent, there was a strong locking surface provided by King, a simple lug which fit into a matching hole in the top strap. In shooting the revolver, the barrel wants to go forward and the breech wants to go rearward, so all King had to do was keep that loop from being able to separate from the lug in terms of rotation. In this case, he actually just used a sliding latch. Tranter would use the loop and lug, but paired it with a unique spring-loaded side lever. This latched the action shut unless depressed in order to open it back up. It should have been strong enough to resist a forceful opening as well, but better safe than sorry, so redundancy was added. A notch on the hammer that overhangs the top strap when the gun is fired, literally at the moment of firing, guaranteeing the top remains sealed at the critical moment. Alright, that's the top break lock improved, but what else can be done to improve over that popular Price? Well, you could further improve that ejector system. Back in the US, the simplified ejector finger had also been discovered, this time by George Wheeler Schofield. whose 1873 patent usually takes all the credit, despite being preceded in Belgium on this matter. Building on Schofield's work, Daniel Weston received his own protection in 1877. Here, a simple lever was fitted beneath the hinge point and acted as a brake or a release for the finger that pressed out the extractor whenever the gun was open. So if you wanted to open the gun without spilling your beans, you just hold the button. Since Wesson wasn't going to patent it in Britain, it seems Tranter was willing to, and the feature was carried over. While we are here, by the way, we can see another new improvement. This time it would be the Arbor Latch. On previous models, this was simply held by a cross screw, but Tranter opted for a spring-loaded lever with a press button sticking out the front of the action, making removal of the cylinder for cleaning or other maintenance extremely simple. Now, the actual lockwork of this new Tranter revolver would mostly resemble the previous 1868 and 1878s, with one minor addition and one very major one. The minor was likely taken from the chief competitor, the Price. This revolver used a pair of cylinder stops, one on the trigger that worked at the moment of fire, and another in front of the trigger, which allowed the top brake action to close without crushing anything, and yet still prevented idle rotation when the gun was not in use. Tranter would use a similar arrangement, although apparently just different enough to allow for a unique patent and avoid paying price. Again, this was a crush-proof system for the top brake mechanism. Now, the major addition to the lockwork was a rebounding hammer. Boom and pop. Not that you can see it very well from there. Now, thanks to research from other episodes, we know that the original hammer Rebounding Arm was born from Alexandre Fagnous's Belgian patent of 1873, which was further refined in 1874 to cover a lockwork we've seen time and time again in later military revolvers. Now, in Belgium, Fagnou's patent had just preceded a similar concept from Jean Warnant, but in Britain, it appears that those two things actually arrived in opposite order. While I only have the abridgment handy, this is Thornton de Muncie's British patent on Jean Warnant's rebounding lock. Thanks to this switcheroo and some choice mentions in Swiss trials, this is likely why we always think of Warnant as the rebounding hammer man in the US and Britain instead of someone like Fagnou. In my digging, I've been unable to find a direct Fagnou British patent or even some communication by an agent. It's actually only been now that I was researching this episode that I found the first instance that I know of his separate rebounding arm being applied in a British patent at all, and it was done, actually very interestingly, by William Tranter. This rebounding lever here. This oddly shaped part transferred power from the lower arm of the mainspring into the hand and the trigger, and on releasing the latter, caused the hammer to rebound automatically, an ideal feature for a double action top brake. So, same effect as the Warnant patent, but with one extra piece. It makes sense that it preceded it elsewhere in the world. Curiously, it may be that Warnant's own agent in Britain tipped Tranter off to the rebounding hammer issue. Some notes surrounding the confusion around what would become the 1880 Mark I Enfield revolver and subsequent legal actions thereof reveal that Tranter was asked to make an improvement to the Warnant lockwork for de Muncie in order to overcome a tendency to misfire. This would mean his own potential competitors tipped him to the new technology and might have prompted him patenting, well, a more Fagnou-like rebounding mechanism of his own. Alright, with all that sorted out, we ultimately ended up with this. Releasing in 1879, it would be marketed as, you won't believe this, Tranter's model of 1879 self-extracting army revolver. So let's get a closer look. Alright, we have what I believe is one of the most beautiful revolvers ever made. Perhaps not this example, it's actually lost most of its finish on the barrel. Definitely this guy sticks out in the wind and has lost some finish, and that cylinder is about gone, but it's beautiful to me, right? Mostly for the mechanism though. So let's talk about that. Let's see, we've got, well, it's clearly British. I don't know how to explain the Britishness of the lines, but you guys are getting used to this. And because it's British, we know that it must have both single action, in which we cock the hammer back and then pull the trigger to release it, or double action, pull the trigger all the way through until our hammer goes whomp, crashing down. Ooh, that's a long pull though. As a matter of fact, you can see we no longer have the trigger horn of the 1878 and prior Tranters. We have a little sear sticking out here. That's the tail of it. and it's way back there. So we got to get all the way back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, while I was doing all that, you may have noticed the other little feature of this gun, which is that after the hammer falls, it automatically rebounds. That is an excellent little addition to this gun. One that probably could have been used on certain Smith & Wessons back in the day. Now, in our case, this is the Army style of model, a 6-shot 45 bore gun. This particular one is proof for 450 Adams, although we'll see other proofings later on. This also lacks a lanyard ring. Nothing there but a screw. However, that's the place where you would put one if you had wanted it when you ordered it. This particular example is marked on the barrel rib. Army, Navy, CSL London. That's who retailed actually the broad majority of these for military service. And of course, it has commercial proofs on the barrel. Now, while we're up here, let me go ahead and show you this block, because if I open her up, yep, that's a little rectangle with a rear sight built into it. This guy is really the locking block of the gun. I know there's a lot of other stuff going on, but know that your locking strength is coming from that particular doodad. The very obvious thumb latch with matching block on the top of the revolver, well, that's just to hold her shut at any given moment of convenience. In other words, this is to prevent us from breaking open, whereas the recoil pressure is borne by that big square lug. So if we were to pop this guy, you can see her free and the action can come open. If we keep going, we'll see extraction, but we're going to talk about that in just a moment. While I'm still in this section, I want to point out that in theory, if you rode your thumb on this guy and then pulled the trigger, you'd be able to fire this gun without that breech, well, technically locked, except look, the hand's going to push it up, and then when the hammer tries to come down after it's out of battery, it's not going to be able to make contact. You know, that's a little hard to see. Maybe I should flip this over. There we go. It's not going to be able to make contact because either the case is too high for the primer to be aligned, so way up here, or if it's just low enough that the primer might strike, well, this little ridge, I don't know if you guys can make that out, that little ridge is going to contact this extension on the back and therefore prevent an out of battery as well. That ridge and notch actually account for one other locking surface when the gun is fired. So if I close her up, and sorry, this is like a three-handed operation. If we fire this guy, you'll see that that hammer notch is holding on to our top strap now, also holding the action shut. So if we have a failure of the latch, let me get where I can show you this guy. There we go. If we have a failure of the latch, okay, so I've got the latch open, I'm holding that trigger, letting the hammer be all the way down. I still can't open the action. Trust me, I'm trying real hard. She's not going anywhere unless I let that hammer out and then she can open on up. So this is a fairly redundantly safe system and a very smart one. Now, as for extraction, we have a hinge here that we break open on, and inside of that hinge is an arm that's going to push up on a central rod that is the extractor star. That all comes from the Smith & Wesson family of revolvers and other iterations thereof. So if we break her open, we'll see that in action. She starts extracting, and as we go over center, boom, she clicks on back. That's because it's getting pinched right up here at the front of the frame, a little easier to see in our animation. One more time, boom. So extract, kicks them all the way out, and then that guy retracts so that we can load in our 6 fresh cartridges. If you have partials, if you have live ammo and you're just checking on it and you don't want to send it all flying, you have the option, when the action is closed, to go ahead and press this button down here where my thumb is at. If you hold that button down, it disengages our extraction mechanism, which means that nothing pops out. Now, in terms of disassembly, we have other smart options, because while I'm out here, let's say I want to take my cylinder out for servicing, no cross screw, no flipping up a lever and rotating, no top screw with a side plate or sliding plate rather, none of that weird stuff that we see for Smith & Wesson and other designs. No, no, no. We take this button here and we depress it and then we pull. And that's it. So this little button is attached to a little hook. That little hook hooks into this little square, and that retains this arbor the entire time we're using the gun. It is that easy to get into the cylinder. And as you can see, let me go ahead, right down the center is our extractor. So you can even pop her out and do a good cleaning job. Make sure you align with that pin, get her back together. and you're back in business. This part of it's actually very easy to access for cleaning. Unfortunately, that doesn't spread to the rest of the gun, because even though we have a side plate with screw a la the 1868 model, although not with a hollow axis pin for the hammer, the actual screw is the pin for the hammer. Not my favorite, but that's how she's set up. Unfortunately, this means that we can't go any deeper into this gun without first compressing this spring, removing that screw, pulling this whole guy off, and then we can access the side plate in order to see a lock work that frankly we can see better in our animation anyway. Now, while I have the cylinder out, let me show you this particular stop here, which is spring loaded such that I can, let me see if I can do this for the camera without losing focus. I can press down on it. That means that if we put the cylinder back in this gun and snap it closed and one of the stops is not aligned, these stops here, if we're somewhere in this spot, right, we're not going to crush or break anything. We're just gonna have this guy spring into place, and then the minute the cylinder rotates one way or the other, it's gonna pop up and do its job, right? When we fire the gun, the actual stop, the one that's working at that moment, is this guy. It's cammed the other one down, and the one that's directly attached to the trigger is forming the stop at the moment of fire. Again, this will be a little easier to see in our animation. Since it's not very easy to get inside this gun, let's go ahead and cut straight to the special effects with some help from Bruno.
To load our revolver, we'll first have to open it, so we'll manually depress the left side thumb latch, which pivots to release a lug on the top strap. Before we open her up, let's take a look at two components. First, this little sear, powered by its own V-spring. This little guy snags a rotating lever. This lever is free to rotate, except when it's in contact with the aforementioned sear. When the lever strikes the sear, it's halted in place, and its finger-like extension forces the extractor out of the cylinder. Once the frame is fully opened, a projection on the upper assembly tips the sear, freeing the rotating lever, which allows the extractor to spring flush. From here, we load our 6 rounds and close up the action. Note that as we do so, the lever is shaped to cam out of the way automatically, springing back over the top strap latch. This lockwork should seem extremely familiar, as it's basically the same as the Webley RIC we saw before. Manually cock back the hammer for single action, and pull the trigger through for double action fire. One minor difference can be found at the top of the strut, which now has an added little extension at its top. We believe this was done to make it easier to adjust timing at the factory. Looking at the trigger, we have the same old cylinder stop projection added to the top rear. This halts the cylinder's rotation when the trigger is pulled to the rear. Again, different from the RIC, this Trantor has an added cylinder locking bolt. It's powered by its own V-spring and cammed by an extension off the front of the trigger. When the action is at rest, the locking bolt springs into the cylinder, preventing rotation at rest. As the trigger pivots, it cams the locking bolt down, freeing the cylinder to rotate until it again strikes the stop attached to the rear of the trigger. And finally, the most important change is the introduction of a rebounding arm. This odd piece is biased by the mainspring, wrapping around the hammer. Its extension fits into a notch in the hand, pressing it towards the cylinder and downwards, which in turn resets the attached trigger. The rebound lever also, unsurprisingly, rebounds the hammer, thanks to a shelf-like cut that meets an extension at the bottom of the hammer. Releasing the trigger causes the rebound to spring into the hammer, tipping its bottom forward and its top rearward, thus clear of the cylinder. Now that we have to unload the revolver, let's get another look at that ejector system. This time, we'll focus on the extractor itself. Currently, the extractor start is flush in the cylinder, basically forming a section of the various chambers. It's attached to a central pin, around which is a coiled spring, constantly pressing the pin, and therefore the star into the cylinder. As we open the action, the previously noted rotating arm forces the extractor rod out of the cylinder, and its accompanying spring is compressed. At full extension, 2 full-length locating pins keep the extractor from rotating. Watching the spring again, once the forward sear is released, the arm is freed and the spring snaps the extractor back into place. Ready for reloading. Now, time to go shoot it.
That is fantastically cool and very forward-thinking, but was it serviceable? Well, unfortunately for Tranter, the British government wasn't giving him a straightforward shot at the goal. Both last episode and earlier in this one, I pointed out that Ordnance was very interested in a next-generation service handgun. And from 1874 through 1880, they pursued this matter rather helter-skelter. But by about the time the Tranter 1879 was firming up, they seemed to have some clear notions of what they wanted. They just weren't announcing them, or really telling anybody that I'm able to see publicly. They may have been whispered, though. By mid-1879, they definitely knew they wanted a break-open action of some sort with rapid extraction. They also fancied that rebounding hammer, particularly with the simply constructed Warnant lockwork. And they clearly needed a large caliber cartridge more powerful than the previous 450 Adams. Lots of complaints there. Yep, turns out it wasn't impressing quite enough upon the determined opponents during the African campaigns. Now take note, nothing about this list explicitly disagrees with the model 1879. Clearly, William Tranter was actually keeping very close to their evolving opinions. Now of course, the Tranter 1879 began its life chambered for the only available service cartridge, the 450 Adams. However, this cartridge started life as a conversion method for the old percussion Adams revolvers. It was designed to be milder, so of course, it didn't garner much appreciation for its, let's say, knockdown power. As an added problem, the Mark I and Mark II 450 Adams used a two-piece case construction. At first, the base rim was iron, but later this was swapped to brass. Both had a habit of being torn off if a case became stuck, and was extracted rapidly with a star-style extractor. Oh, say like on a Tranter. Yeah, that didn't test well with the government, which is actually somewhat unfair because it turns out they weren't going to stick with the 450 Adams anyway. Envious of the American 45 Colt, a hard-hitting but yes, heavy recoiling cartridge, it appears the government men focused on a compromise of sorts. And welcome to one of the most immediately confusing cartridges in handgun history. The Enfield Mark I cartridge of 1880 is actually a slight mystery, as very few were ever made before changes began, resulting in the much better known Mark II of the same year. Now here is the thing to know. The Mark I had a .455 inch diameter bullet. The Mark II, while different in construction, kept the same diameter. The very next year, the Mark III cartridge dropped, now increased to .476. Just to be clear though, none of these are 455 Webley. That came later, and it's often confused for these cartridges. For our story, the most impactful cartridge would be the .455 Enfield Mark II, which thankfully the Tranter revolver could be chambered and proofed for without too much fuss. It also allowed some backwards compatibility with 450 Adams, although I doubt precision was super high. So, early Tranter 1879s, like mine here, will be marked and proofed only for 450 Adams. Later, they will display markings like 450 or 455 center fire. I've heard of odd pieces marked 476, this would be in reference to the Mark III cartridge. But realistically, a 455 chambering would fire all the same, and I've been unable to confirm a photograph of one so marked. Though 1879s in general are actually rare things to find. Now all of this should have put the Tranter at the head of the pack for British adoption, but it seems the officials had other plans. You see, in their search for rapid unloading and rebounding lockworks, instead of listening to Tranter, they just took two totally independent designs and mashed them together all on their own. The Warnant lockwork and the Owen Jones selective extraction system were blended at the Royal Small Arms Factory, Enfield, and put into trials without really letting the inventors know very much at all. The result, again, was the Enfield Mark I of 1880, a gun that sadly precluded the Tranter from ever being adopted. The Enfield revolver didn't just deny Tranter contract, it actually denied him a lot of contracts because this was part of the British government's new commitment to produce their own arms at Enfield and not rely on the commercial market. This was a terrible blow to a man who had invested in a massive factory specifically to capitalize on large government orders. But I'm sure Enfield had its reasons. For example, both the Adams revolver and the Tranter 1878 had listed as interchangeable in service, meaning parts from any Adams should be able to swap into any other Adams, and the same for Tranters to Tranters. Despite this assurance, this degree of interchangeability was never actually achieved by either. Attempts to swap parts on Tranters in the modern era have revealed, yeah, they don't just go in without hand fitting. It may be the government was growing tired of false promises. With no mass orders, the 1879 was doomed to compete with a growing number of commercial revolvers for civilian sales and officer private purchases. Many 1879s will therefore be marked on the top by the Army Navy CSL London, which was likely the largest retailer of these martial arms. Since the 1879 was doomed from the start, unlike the previous 1878, we actually see it in a variety of configurations, but there are, loosely two gross patterns. There's a larger army style, like the one I have here. These would be the sort to be sold into military service. They could be plain or engraved, blued or nickeled, barrels usually ranging from 5 to 6 inches in length. Identified examples have been linked to officers in the First Boer War, and more so the Mahdist War, specifically Khartoum, and actually some seem to have held over into the Second Boer War. The army-sized guns seem to be consistent in terms of their production markings. They appear to start at a serial number of about 4,000 and intertwine with the last of the Tranter Model 1878s, at least for a little while, with a high number reported as 5,044. It's likely 1,000 or fewer were ever made. Later examples, like the 1878, tend to be marked by the Kynoch gun factory. I'm betting those were assembled from stock and marketed years later, as Kynoch took over in 1885. My suspicion is the 1879 was already largely out of the market by that date. Now, I did say there was, loosely, a second pattern, and I don't have an example here. These would be smaller 5-shot examples with barrels as short as 3 3/4 of an inch. There would also be examples both 5 and 6-shot in the .380 centerfire cartridge popular in Britain at the time on the commercial market. This fancy custom job with bird's head grip was actually presented to William A. Pinkerton, son of the Alan Pinkerton of the famous detective, so lots of room for variation in these guys. Among the 5-shots, there also appears to be a sort of final simplified model. These are either blank or marked again by Kynoch, at least the few that are known. While I haven't handled one, the nose cap for the Arbor appears to be greatly simplified with some sort of cover spring. Alright, a sadly lackluster reception for an otherwise handsome revolver, but why the heck did we do a whole episode on just another commercial British wheel gun? I mean, there's tons of these out there, and we're obviously not going to hit them all with their own standalone episodes. Well, for starters, it helped round out the story of William Tranter. Never having achieved his vision of continuous mass government orders, Tranter retired from his factories in 1885, while he would remain at least somewhat involved in the Kynoch concern, which took over his excellent factory at Aston Cross. Unfortunately, we don't know any direct action of his in the small arms industry from here until his death in 1890. And honestly, I'm unsure of how much of an inventor William Tranter really was versus being the sort of man to identify good ideas and buy or just patent them quickly in his name in England. The lines are a bit blurry because at his heart, he was a landowner and industrialist above just a metal cutter. Regardless, he was a very influential man in Birmingham history, and that's a bigger reason why I wanted to cover this revolver, because the 1879 is clearly a sort of prototype for the actually much later Webley service revolver. By the time of the adoption of what would become the Mark I Webley, we do see a fairly in-depth simplification of the Tranter system, and yet it's all still there. The top brake based on Smith & Wesson, the rebounding lockwork based on Fanu, the 455 bore, the ergonomics of the thumb latch, and the grip knuckle, if not the grip itself, mind you. Really, the only problem with this gun in 1879 is that it was too new and a little too unpolished, too susceptible to its own complexity, and of course, it was forced to use a frankly inferior case construction for the cartridge during its assessment, which meant tearing rims and not impressing anyone. And the very same cartridge, by the way, that kind of messed this gun up was just thrown out to make way for what would be the Enfield, a gun that many called a failure as the government went scrambling to the Webley for the same features that they'd actually overlooked on this particular piece. But for my part, I'm happy to recognize this as perhaps the first of what we think of as the quintessential British service revolvers. And it certainly means that Webley didn't just exist in a vacuum. It just wasn't invented out of whole cloth. Rather, they refined what was already a good idea. But before I praise it too much, let's get Mae a chance to tell us how it shoots. All right, once more, we made room for Mae.
Hello.
Who did something to me in a past life, and now I must torture her for eternity with revolvers.
I'm actually pretty sure that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
I'm a little spooked.
Don't you want to do the Revolver show?
Not for eternity,
Mae
no. Apparently,
sits
this
around
is just
and
my version of a hell.
I show up with, like, a box comes in the mail, and I'm like, Mae, guess what? Another antique revolver.
The problem is that it's always a small box. So I'm just like, oh, great, it's a revolver. And then he pulls it out, and I'm like, oh, great, it's a revolver. And he's like, look, it's broken. I'm like, of course it's broken. It's a freaking revolver from the 1870s.
You don't understand, young lady. Revolvers are simpler and have fewer parts, and they never break down.
He's borrowing and finding old broken ones and then making them work and then being like, look, we're going to go shoot it now. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Cool. That looks like it's going to be awkward as heck. He's like, yeah, it's going to be. And I'm like, oh.
You're going to hate it. And all the viewers will
His
clap.
eyes just get wider. It's like this deranged look about him.
Do you want to talk about this one, though?
A little bit. That one actually does look kind of cool.
This is the Trantor model of 1879, the self-extracting one. Let me get this into your hands.
I remember you showing me pictures of this one, and I remember thinking, because he'd already showed me the 78, so I'm thinking, oh, this looks even cooler. I mean, look at those lines on that. I love the color change on the grips. Like, I love that knuckle, the way it looked.
I like the wraparound checkering.
The wraparound. Oh, on the grip itself?
Yeah,
that's
all
actually,
the way around.
It's really nice. It's really beautiful.
There's something to be said for these guys, the old British revolvers that are not two pieces of wood, it's one piece of wood.
Yeah, it's all just one. So if one cracks, you're just screwed.
You never have that weird grip feeling. You know what I mean? Like, it's always...
Yeah, like there's no separation. It's all just one.
Yeah.
So you become one.
So when it's comfortable, it's
the
great.
Revolver.
The 1878 wasn't comfortable, though.
No,
anyway,
no.
so let's keep going for looks.
But no, yeah, seriously, look at all the features, too. Like, it looks so steampunky, I guess I want to say.
You have, count the buttons. How many buttons we got going on?
Well, there's one button here.
Okay.
And there's another button here, so that's
Okay.
2.
And then we got the lever.
Yeah. 3.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pin. That's a
Okay.
stop pin for this gate, which
Yeah,
is
not a button.
frankly weird to me.
It's probably like the only thing that's aesthetically weird on the gun is the stop pin.
I mean, you could argue that this here is a button in some ways, and that it does get depressed.
You can see it from the outside of the gun.
Yeah.
There's a lot of little things.
Maybe a button.
There's lots of things to see. It's like one of those like kids' toy with all the little things you can roll and twist on it. You know?
There's a lot of things to go on this guy.
Don't give this to kids.
No, don't. This just looks like a lot is happening with it.
Right.
And it's kind of cool looking as a result.
Okay.
Neat.
So walk us through. Is everything obvious in function?
I mean, for me, kind of, and yes and no. So obviously the gate, cool, pretty straightforward there. Can't
So
argue with
natural you
that.
called it a gate instead of a lever.
Yeah, sorry, that is a lever, not a gate.
But that's all right. You knew what it meant.
Yeah, it's true. I know it
As a
opens the
user.
gun.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
You know how the trigger do.
Yep, I know how the trigger do. I know how the hammer do.
And it kind of breaks down from there.
And then, yeah, I'm just like, what? Is that part of the takedown is my thought? And then I'm like, that's got to be part of the takedown too. Wait, why are there 2 buttons for part of the takedown? I mean, that would pull the arbor out, which would then release the cylinder. Cool, I get that. The heck does that button do? Like,
The
is it
funnier part is
like,
this doesn't even let you pull the arbor out. So you push this button and you think you're going to pull this thing out the front. No, you got to pull the cylinder out the back.
oh.
And then that button, of course, was the disconnect for the ejection system.
See, no, I wouldn't have been able to figure that out.
Which you can't hit on the fly, which is something that I don't think people always understand. So you can't like get it partially broken open and then hit it. Mm-hmm. You have to be hitting it as you're opening it.
Is that like a Webley feature, I want to say? Like on one of the Webleys, they had like a button underneath that did that?
Sort of. There's some commercial Webley options that have things you can do. And technically you can trick a regular Webley. Mm-hmm. Like you can put your thumb on the thing.
You can lie to it and be like, hey, you can do it.
Yeah, it's like I have a Mark 6 right here.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, that
and so
worked
like
out.
the Mark 6, the way it works with its little detenty spring-loaded thing here.
Yeah, it's almost
similar.
Yeah,
No, that's more of a
that's
fixed.
different.
It's more of a fixed arm. But on this one, if you hold that on a Webley, you can get it to do that. But the problem is you are in pinch zone galore if you're in a hurry.
Well, you are in pinch zone. But this one's actually pretty convenient.
This thing will give you a blood blister like you wouldn't believe.
Oh, you don't even have to press it that hard. That's pretty cool.
Right, that's intended to do that. That comes from the Smith & Wesson family.
Oh, okay.
We actually failed to play with that feature in the Russian episode, I believe.
Well, we're dumb.
Yeah, I know. We got to redo. Honestly, I want to talk way more
We were
about
so
number
young
threes one
back
day.
then. We didn't know any better.
Yeah, it's funny. Is I knew the feature and I just never made it into the script.
Oh, really?
Like, I knew it, and I went later on. I went, Wait, I never mentioned that. I just the sentences didn't. It's like Anchorman, where I'm the one making the script, right? But then later when I read it, I don't know what I wrote. I just read the thing.
It's all
right?
in all caps, and he's just shouting at the screen. I'm sure.
So like, if there's something I forget to cover, no one knows to check me. So like, it's all on me. So we need to go back and do. There's a lot I can add to the Smith and Wesson family. Actually, if anybody has some of the earlier ones, wants to loan the show.
Ooh, yeah.
So
that'd be
those
cool.
are expensive. I can't afford them.
They are. Not even a little bit.
Loaners are great.
Loaners. Okay, but looks-wise...
We've explored all the buttons.
Yep, we covered all the buttons. Okay. Now let's see here. So we had the 78, in which I was not happy with that grip. You are not happy with that grip. Nobody likes the grip on the 78. Is this going to be better?
There's some like six-fingered weirdo out there that likes the 78 grip.
I mean, it's not his fault he has 6 fingers. I mean, he's still... strange.
It still has a thumb too.
Yeah. Ooh, that'd be cool. It's better, but yeah, it's definitely better in that if I'm up at the knuckle, it's not as awkward of an angle.
Okay, so you can use it from the knuckle.
Yeah, I want to say also my reach to the trigger is not quite as far forward. No, it's probably about the same.
It feels a little more tucked into me.
Yeah.
Or at least it's not as awkward at getting too far back in the hand.
It's not as awkward feeling we're in placement. So it's a little bit better.
I would consider it significantly better.
Why would you consider it significant?
Because I have a bigger hand than you, so I can just do this.
So you can show off with your long fingers.
I'm on the knuckle.
Okay.
And I'm just boop, and I'm pointed. So this grip feels really good to me because I have adult male hands.
I mean, yeah, that's true. I do have lady hands. So that is going to make a difference. But it is slightly better. I can't argue with that. So we've gone from a gate loading system to top brake loading. Cool.
Simultaneous eject.
Yep. Simultaneous eject. Great. That's going to be rapid. And then I can load quickly all right here. Great. Again, only issues come with potentially top brake systems being a little more vulnerable in general over time.
No, that time, by the way, I do not know of any speed loader options for this piece.
Would have been cool.
I did not see a patent for one. I think this is predating the Purdue at that point.
And there's definitely no fitting any sort of moon clip in that. Like there's no space in between the cylinder and the wall right here. So yeah, that's kind of cool in its right. Although I have no ejector rod now. So, I wouldn't need it because I'm stupid.
I don't know why you're looking
My brain is like looking for something that shouldn't be there.
It should make Berhanzius happy, right? There's nothing to snag.
There we go. That fixed the Berhanzius problem right there.
Ray has found one thing that's good about top brakes.
Yeah, can't argue with that.
You can't snag the ejector rod.
Nope, no problem there. Sights are weaker. It's a really tiny V-notch rear with a still arguably pretty okay front. It's not a really
kind of
big
weird.
moon.
This one had better sights.
Yeah, it is a bit strange that the 78 did have better, stronger
huge
sights.
sights for a revolver.
Meanwhile, this feels more like if I was doing some like fine shooting, for long distance.
That makes me think of other revolvers in its day where I'm like, what is
target
that?
shooting?
Did people have better eyes? Like, what is going on?
I mean, I am wearing glasses, so I don't have great eyes.
That's true, but it's just like in a hurry. I can't. These I'd rather use in a hurry.
Right, those are preferable in a hurry. This one, I'm just like, no, I'm gonna have to take my time with that one, unfortunately.
Right. How can you reach the hammer from a good grip?
Okay, so if I'm down here.
Okay, you're shooting grip.
No, not really.
Okay, you got scooch.
So I had to scooch. I had to scooch on both the 78 and the 79, unfortunately.
Scoocher.
This was easier to scooch down on, though, because I don't have to go quite as far, it doesn't feel.
Let's see with my big normal man hands. All right, I'm pointed.
Okay.
And then, that's no problem.
Also does feel a bit lighter. The hammer pull itself does feel slightly lighter than the 78.
It is very lighter, and this one has kind of it's a soft sear.
Soft, yeah. It's very soft.
I will say we had to be careful with this one, and I don't want to do it because it's going to cause more damage. You can override the sear on this one if you bap the hammer because it's just worn down. So it needs to be recut at some point, but then that invites timing issues, and the gun was in time, so we did not do that. We just knew what we were doing on range, and we're careful with it. So this one's actually got a little sear wear in it.
Gotcha.
So,
and then another point, by the way, was talking on the hammer, auto rebound. Hey!
Yeah, how do you do that?
Huh?
Do it. Show me how that works.
Okay. All right, I've pulled all the way through.
She's a witch! We already did that joke.
Yeah, we did already do that joke. But no, that's actually pulling it back pretty far, too. So I'm pretty confident that that's not going to
I'm going to make a t-shirt that's just she's a witch with a rebounding hammer.
With automatic
and
rebound.
No one will know what it means, including our own fans. Because no one will buy it. And I will count it as a success because I do not know how to run a business.
It's like him in the Tapoom shirt. Although you did have
like
some
this
people buy it.
Howdah
I know,
shirt.
it's a really good shirt, but
It's
not
the
a lot of
best
people
shirt.
love it.
Anyway,
For some reason, they don't like art. It was good art, though.
I'm just gonna make a shirt that just says "old guns," and that's all it's gonna be.
Just old guns.
And you know what? It'll be our #1 seller, and I'll just sit there and pull my hair out and cry.
Yeah, you will. You actually might. And then the trigger pull itself, creaky, smush, fall.
It's almost like it's the same lock work,
It's almost like it's identical.
with just a rebounding thing attached.
It feels worse because of the creakiness of it, but I'm sure that's to do with the condition of the gun too. So it's like a worse 78.
Would you consider it lighter than this one, or easier to pull?
Maybe a little bit lighter. Maybe a little bit lighter, but
it
it
feel
is easier
easier?
to pull in that I've got a better grip on it.
So cut the 78 out.
It is lighter.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it is definitely lighter.
You can even see like the hammer yank you versus this one. It's much
Yeah.
softer sprung.
Although if it's the same internal workings, essentially, why would it be slightly lighter?
Softer sprung.
That's really it?
Yeah, and then also don't forget the sear engagement on that one isn't nearly as tight because you can override the sear on that one. So it's when you're hitting that sear, it's giving up nice and easy.
That's fair.
So this
Okay.
poor thing has got some age on it.
Yeah. Looks cool, though. The age made it look cooler.
Oh, just the weird uneven
Yeah,
wear.
yeah, yeah. And then recoil, I still remember being pretty moderate on this one, too.
So this to me felt like what I expected the 78 to feel like when I shot it, which
Yeah.
is that the 450 Adams is a mild cartridge. I experienced mild recoil out of a heavy gun. Would you argue any differently?
Well, I thought it still felt pretty moderate. I thought it was slightly better than the 78, but if I remember even from shooting that day, it still had a fair bit of snap to it. Maybe because it still has that high bore axis going on.
To me, it just didn't feel that authoritative. Like, I really thought, like, I was hoping to feel kind of like in the Colt range, 78, where it's just boom, because
You
as
know, if
much
I were to
as
compare the two, this one was definitely lighter.
there's something in the proto brain, right, where it's just like the big boom makes the most damage. So, like, even though you don't want a lot of recoil, you kind of wants a lot of recoil.
Kind of sounds
Yeah.
authoritative.
Now, the one thing is this gun will chamber, by the way, we were talking about this last time. This gun will chamber 45 Colt and
Right.
450. Don't
Right.
shoot 45 Colt out of these.
But
But it'll
can
chamber.
it.
That will not chamber 45 Colt.
Oh, so there was some tapering in here and
Yes.
such that it wouldn't allow for it.
However, it will chamber 455 Mark 1 or Mark 2 or Mark, hold on. 455 Mark 2 or 476, which is the Mark 3. Thank you, Britain.
So they were going in a different direction then.
It will chamber the Enfield cartridge. However, this is a very early example of one of these guns. I think it's in like serial number is like 2050 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
4050.
Yeah,
and they
4,000
started
something.
presumably at 4000. So this is a very early one. It has actually, I don't know if I covered this in the episode. If you see later ones, the little takedown thing gets rotated to the side.
Huh.
Just later on in production.
Okay.
The button is just on the side instead of the bottom.
Sure.
I don't really know why. I don't know if it was a holster issue or what. You'd think that
maybe.
it'd be safer like that in a holster.
I mean,
but-
this could get punched or dinged.
yeah, but if it's from the side, I don't know. I don't know the reason. So, what was I saying?
You were talking about words.
Thank you.
The ammo, the cartridge change up.
So this will chamber 476 essentially. Although it's probably more like 455 Mark II.
But was it rated for shooting that?
I don't know. So this one's proofed only for 450
Yeah, it's got
Adams.
a stamp right there, 450.
Because it's early, it probably released in 79 or early 80 before the 455 Mark 1 or 2 cartridges dropped, right? Once those cartridges drop, Tranter starts marking these for both 450 and 455, right? But again, wasn't proofed for it.
Right.
Valuable antique. I'm not taking the chance.
No, there's no way.
So it should be fine. I mean, the action should be able to stand it just fine, but I just don't want to be that guy.
Nah.
So I didn't run it to full power, but in theory, you could have had a slightly hotter cartridge, something that felt...
I think that would have given you your authoritativeness you were looking for.
Yeah, do you think it could have handled the hotter cartridge in your hand
I
without
think it
beating
could
you up?
have. Yeah, even the wear on this gun in particular that day, I still think it could have handled hotter.
No, I meant in terms of the ergonomics to your hand, though. Like, for you. If it was more recoil, like if you shot even something as hard as 45 Colt out of that,
Yeah.
do you think it would be uncontrollably bad, or...
No, I don't think it actually would have been that bad just because...
If you shot 45 Colt out of this...
Terrible.
Okay.
Horrible. Nightmare.
Okay.
Don't do that.
But then if you shot 45 Colt out of that, don't
Probably-
do it, but if it happened...
Probably could handle it.
Okay.
I think so.
Like in your grip?
Yeah, I think the grip would be okay.
Okay. Would you prefer that grip or would you prefer the 78 grip?
I'm trying to remember. I'm going to have to look at the footage on this one, how much exactly I shifted on both of these guns, because there was still some shifting that had to be done. I wanted to say I shifted less here on the 79, but now I'm struggling. Now I'm struggling to remember which one I shifted less on. Now, granted...
All right, gut instinct.
Hold on. I'm going to discount having to reach up for single action because on this one I have to reach. I literally could not keep my grip in order to reach the single action. Can you keep your grip on this and reach for a single action? I can't remember. Oh yeah, you can. You can. Man, that's such a terrible grip.
Keeps coming back. She keeps coming back.
I don't want to come back to that. I hate that bird's beak grip.
The Colt's gonna win.
I don't like that. That's a terrible one.
Your gut is telling you to never give the Colt a point.
I don't like giving...
And at every turn, she keeps giving the Colt a point.
It's because he keeps giving me crappy revolvers.
Double action pull between this and that.
This one.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's just lighter, and granted, it's not as smooth.
Reloading between this and that.
This one's faster for reloading. Okay, thank you. You gave me some points.
If you're buying a Tranter private purchase.
Between this and that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about this one?
You're trying to find all the Tranters in the room, and he's hiding them everywhere.
Well, you got a full Tranter set now.
Wait, now hold on. So for private purchase? Yeah. Nah, that one's still kind of got a lot of hand fitting to it and crap. Nah, we just got a DQ.
It's still a gate loader.
Yeah.
A little shrimpy thing. Yeah. You can shoot 4.55 out of that one.
Yeah, I'd rather take this one.
Okay.
It's better. It's just better.
I believe you.
It's already better.
I believe you.
I mean, it could have done better, but it's already better.
All right, so real big question. Was
the Mark 6 out by then?
No, not at all. I'm not asking you between the two.
I was just confused for a second.
I haven't asked the question yet. Give me a moment.
Okay. You had your moment. I just didn't ask it. Okay.
All right. Question. Mm-hmm. Same vibe, yes or no?
Pretty close vibes because we've got this lever opening action, top break, big long revolver. Yeah, it's got a lot of similar vibes to it, but the Mark 6 obviously is vastly
is it?
Better. And so,
is it?
Yes.
Okay, let's. It's been a long time since you handled a Mark 6. Let's put that in your hand.
Okay.
Is that trigger much closer?
The hammer's much closer.
Oh, the hammer's usable.
Trigger
is that your actual shooting grip, though? That looks a little high. Your shooting grip's lower than you thought. And then the hammer's kind of hard to reach. And you're just riding that trigger weird for some reason. Oh!
It's still better. It still feels better.
Okay, ready?
Yep, trigger pull feels better.
Okay, ready, single action, go.
I mean,
but you don't know. Ready, single action, go.
All right, ready?
Yeah. And boom.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I ride the hammer a little bit.
Ready, single action, go.
I don't like how soft that is.
Yeah, what'd you do?
No, the problem is that the hammer's
You're waiting for the click.
I'm waiting for the click. I'm waiting to feel something, and it's such a soft.
Okay, assuming it had a click, you can't discount it for not having a click. That's rare.
But no, okay, ready? All right. Yeah, that hammer's worse. That hammer's worse.
So the Mark 6
even the pull through. Yeah, the Mark 6 is superior.
And yet, this is the Mark 6. Do you remember shooting what I believe we had the Mark 5 with the bird's head?
Or was it the Mark 4?
I don't. They're all the same. All of them. Mark 2, 3, 4 all had that round grip.
Yeah.
If you had to choose between any of those Webleys with their weird round grip and that.
Oh. Why do you do this to me?
Because I love this is my new game.
Probably picked this one.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
So it's funny, but you think about it, the Brits walked away from that grip and came back to an approximation of it in like 1916, I believe.
Well, they realized their mistake. It just took them a long time.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And not only that, but they walked away from that gun entirely. They never adopted it. And they went with something else that was going to be far superior. The Enfield Mark 1 and 2, which we're going to see later, is not this gun at all.
Right.
It's not that gun at all either, right? And yet these two guns, like if we hold these up and the Enfield is sitting in between them, it's like, why did you bother? Because look what you ended up doing. You ended up, tell me materially what's all that different from this gun. I mean... It's simpler lock work.
It is simpler lock work, which you can't objectively tell that from the outside.
A simpler top strap lock.
It is simpler. And, interestingly...
A simpler ejection system. You don't know that, but...
No, again, I'm trying to objectively look
mechanically,
from the outside,
the ejection's a little simpler. So it's basically everything's a little simpler.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what you don't have? You don't have your cool button.
No.
It's gone.
No, it's gone.
You don't have your quick takedown for the cylinder. Getting the cylinder out of that is a nightmare.
Okay.
And you technically have a better bushing in that for how to hold on to the cylinder. It's slicker, right? It's got a slicker cylinder. That's about it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Same vibe.
Yeah. Pretty close.
1879.
They almost had it.
The birth of really what we all think of as the British revolver.
Yeah.
Perhaps less than 1,000 made, never militarily adopted, only sold to some very smart officers who bought it.
Who actually thought that was the future.
This is retrofuturism.
Yeah.
But the problem is we're not smart enough to see it.
No.
Like,
can't appreciate it for its time.
The gap between this and that is significant.
It's closer.
It's all ancient to us.
Right.
You know what I mean? So... And don't get me wrong, 1887, I believe, is when the Mark I rolls in for the Webleys, and most of these improvements are there, although it didn't have this is something people don't understand. Just because it's a Mark I Webley, it didn't have the cylinder thing here going on where it holds the cylinder as a bearing.
Right.
It didn't have the grip like this. It did have a knuckle, but it was a weird grip. It didn't have a lot of things that get added to the gun later on through various marks. So you're really looking into like the 90s. Before this thing really materially starts to improve over that one. So, I don't know. I think Tranter had it right. I think he just didn't have it at the right moment.
Yeah, sometimes you can have an idea that's great a little too early in time for it to actually be appreciated and acknowledged for its, futuristic.
I also think it's really significant that Tranter leaves in 1885 and the Mark I Webley appears in 1887. Like,
spooky.
If Tranter was around, Webley would have had some real competition.
Yeah, he might have.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. I'd like to see a movie of that one day. That'd be a way better movie than what's out right now.
I really wish we had more biographers on this stuff. People want me to do more of it. It's not my talent, guys. Like, I do the guns.
There's a lot of heavy research involved in that stuff.
You got to read a lot of letters, too.
Yeah, you do.
And there's just no time. But anyway, all right.
Final thoughts on it? Yeah. This was one of those ones that, unlike the 78, when I actually picked it up, it wasn't as bizarre and weird and horrible feeling.
Kind of comfy.
It still felt it felt not fantastic, but it wasn't terrible either. So it was one of the things where oh, thank God, I get to pick up a cool gun and it's not terrible.
As an adult male, I love this grip. I think, I will say, one of Tranter's big things for this had to be one-handed operation. And I don't want to whip up on an old gun.
No.
But if I snap that, it would
definitely go.
Like, there's nothing to stop me from going ka-chunk and having this actually pop over center.
Right.
I could definitely, the spring is soft enough, I could diesel it.
Oh, yeah. I could diesel it. It'd be fine.
Yeah. And so if you think about just being able to just pop that in the heat of battle and have everything out and just grab some loosies and get a couple in there and just...
Can't argue with it.
And by the way, I'm rocking the lever because I'm trying not to beat up the mechanism, but it's cammed so that you can just pop it.
Right, you can just pop it over.
So
pretty cool.
It's extremely thoughtful in its ergonomics. And I don't know if I played that up enough in this episode because making a pistol that worked with just one hand.
We rarely ever actually do talk about that.
No,
it's a good concept in general.
Other than the Webley Mark 6 is future gun, right?
Yeah, that is future gun. Definitely could do it.
The 78, all those other guns
all require two hands.
Not only that, but they require you to transfer hands if you're right-handed.
Right, for opening the gate and loading
do this whole thing,
and
then bring it back over. It's not meant. If you think about it, if they were making them right-handed to stay in your right hand ready,
right,
they would have put all this stuff on the left side.
Yeah, so you could have ejected over here and popped in over here and then gone.
Now, a lot of that's cavalry habit because you would take up your reins in your left hand, shoot with your right, and then you put your gun in with your reins.
That way you could, both.
Right. But this, if you have reins in your left hand...
It's clearly a move from the cavalry era.
Yeah, you just kunk that open, and then if you really want to hold it with your reins, like let's say you're cavalry, and you just kunk that open and eject all your rounds, you're like, boom, and then just grab your ammo, shove it in there. That seems way better.
I mean, granted, the barrel could be hot, but that's about it.
I always get that, but it's like...
When are you shooting that many rounds out of your revolver back then, when that is not your primary piece, most likely? For most of these old pistols, you'd have maybe 3 or 4 full cylinder sets of ammo on you. Maybe 4 is a lot, right? Yeah, oh no, it is.
And dump it into the cylinder just 3 times in a row, if you're wearing gloves, you're not going to burn yourself.
yeah.
You know, and the cavalry's wearing gloves. If you're not cavalry, you're probably not going through that many reloads before you're going to find a carbine.
Yeah.
So, all right. Now, once again, sorry, final thoughts.
Yeah. So like I said, really cool gun. Happy that I was actually able to shoot this guy and not be the most uncomfortable. Again, main issues were still with that grip and having to ride up and down it. Unfortunately, not really finding a comfortable place for my hand in the end.
All right. Well, I think that does it for us today.
Yeah, I guess so.
We're done with Tranter.
For now.
No.
Are we done?
Well, okay. There's some Civil War stuff I'd like to cover.
Right. You did talk about
that. But we've reached the end of Tranter.
That's true.
One day we might get to do a prequel.
Ooh. The pre-Tranter.
If anybody wants to loan us their Tranter.
Yes.
So, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and have a good one.
Very cool, though. Thank you.
Sorry, for anybody, there's a Robot Chicken sketch in which Ted Turner went nuts and dressed up as Captain Planet, started yelling Captain Planet and kicking people in the pills, which is why I find it funny to yell Captain Planet. But then Ted Turner also lives in Charleston, and there's a great Ted Turner story that we
do
know.
actually have a great Ted Turner story. Like the actual people.
Yeah, not
Live
the Captain
people.
Planet one.
No.
Although I feel like that's a more believable thing after, anyway.
Yeah. And then on top of that, I'm just horrified at the thought that it's possible there could be a curator listening to this, which several actually do listen to this, and they're going to go check one of their guns, and sure enough, DNA swab tests that shit, and boom, it's aspirin.
DNA swab, just licking it. If
I
it
know.
tastes sour, it's aspirin.
Well, don't go licking guns. I feel like that's a bad thing to do, is go around licking guns.
It's that or spend money. But I know that had a unique impact on machine gun prices. Mm-hmm. Because I went to, I would go to doctor's appointments, or I would be doing something unrelated to somebody, like I'd be talking to an attorney or something.
Right.
I'd be talking to people that had money from their profession, and they would find out what I do. And for quite a while after that, I would hear people go, oh yeah, I bought one or two myself after reading that. Mm-hmm. And these are people that don't shoot them.
No.
They literally just
They
put them
sit in their attic or something, or
yeah,
their garage.
they're like, yeah, I bought it, I put it away. And that's it.
It's just an investment
they just
nest
bought it to
egg.
lock it up.